Hello, my name is Mark Taylor. Welcome to this 3-podcast network, which includes the shows Education on Fire, sharing creative and inspiring learning in our schools; Learning on Fire, education from sharing wisdom, not testing; and the National Association for Primary Education. Find out all you need to know at educationonfire.com. There comes a time in every person's life when you realise it's not about doing what you are told, but doing what you know is right for you. Let us take a journey of learning and discovery with the world's most successful people who are living the life of their dreams, walking through life using their inner wisdom and being of service to others. Forget exams, grades and test scores. What is your purpose? As we let go of what we think should be and learn from our elders to gain knowledge, inspiration and a true sense of who we are. What are your dreams? Does your life have meaning? Are you living a life of significance? Let's talk with today's guest. Hello and welcome as we spend some more time together on the Learning on Fire podcast. Today we've got a slightly different format. I'm talking to Margaret Rooke today, who's a writer, and her aim is to inspire children, teenagers, their parents and carers, and people who work with them. Her books include You Can Change the World, Everyday Teen Heroes Making a Difference Everywhere, Dyslexia is My Superpower most of the time, and Creative, Successful, Dyslexic. 23 high achievers share their stories. Thank you, Margaret, for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's start with a little bit about your background and professional experience, just so that we can set the scene into why you sort of got involved in being an author.
I was a journalist for many years. It was what I always wanted to do ever since I was a very small child. And when I had my kids, I found it quite difficult to work as a freelance and I started working for charities, which I loved. And when I lost my job, I sort of thought, what is it I really love to do? And I realised that I'd ghostwritten some books a long time before, and I realised that writing books was what I absolutely loved. So I started doing that, and it's been an absolute joy, actually, the way my career has gone.
And it's interesting, isn't it, how this is a theme that comes up quite often, is the fact that no matter how your career takes you or where you think it might go, or whether you've got a job and then you have a side passion that you do, or like there are many people who've lost their job or had a slight change in their circumstances, but then that passion keeps coming back, and then it's enabled people to actually then focus on that more directly, and that's often taken them into the world, like you say, where they're really loving what they do.
Yeah, and I really like that idea, which kind of come across a lot with the teenagers and the children and teenagers I talk to, of good things coming out of difficult times. Certainly that was the case with my career.
And just take us through, I mentioned some of the titles of the books at the beginning of the show. Why those particular subjects? Why that particular topic area that you've focused on so far?
I started off writing about dyslexia because we found out when she was about 13, 14 that my daughter was dyslexic. And it was a huge shock to us because she'd achieved very well in primary school and then stopped achieving when she went to secondary school. And I was just filled with this sort of need for it not to affect her self-worth. I wanted her to still believe that no matter how much she struggled at school, and she really did seem to be struggling then, that she could follow her dreams. Yeah, it may sound like a bit like a cliche, but that's what I wanted for her. So I wrote my first book, Creative, Successful, Dyslexic, which is a series of interviews with incredibly successful adults with dyslexia. People like Dame Darcy Bussell, David Bailey, Eddie Izzard, just all sorts of people from across the spectrum. The way that they told their stories about struggling at school and then finding their niche, having some adult support and doing what they achieved was the message I wanted to get across, both for my own daughter and for others like her who were struggling in mainstream school.
And what was it, do you think, or I don't know whether you came to the bottom of this, why was it that primary school seemed to be okay and something which your daughter was able to be thriving, it sounds like, but then suddenly getting that slightly older, was it the change of school, was it the environment, was it an age-related thing? Did you ever sort of know what that was?
Well, I mean, I had different people. People had different viewpoints, which were all really interesting. My daughter's viewpoint was that she got away with it at primary school. She was able to compensate with the skills she had, so she could learn what they gave her to do. I mean, for example, I remember we worked really, really hard on the weekly spelling tests, and quite often she might get full marks, and then the next day she would have forgotten them all. But as far as the teacher knew, she had full marks. So she kind of found ways to get away with it. Secondary school, I think, secondary schools are a much more complex institution. This was a huge, comprehensive, lots of different teachers, lots of different structures. I imagine the work went up a gear, and it was just all too much. She just found it chaotic and difficult to deal with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It sort of sounds like that primary system, you find a way to work and make the most of the system, because like you say, it's about, like say, if it's a spelling test, you do what you need to do and then you can move on, but it's bringing all those things together. And I can see that from secondary school with my youngest daughter just going into secondary school. It's a completely different way of being able to adjust into that learning environment, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
So was it a natural progression then to take the dyslexia books and then go into the everyday teen heroes?
In part it was, because so for my second book, which was called Dyslexia is My Superpower, most of the time I interviewed children and teens about their own experiences. And I think actually there's a lot for teachers and those working in schools to learn from what they said. So I was used to interviewing teenagers, but I was also aware of the way the news agenda had changed. There was so much being talked about teenage mental health and all the difficulties that teenagers go through. Also, there was a lot being brought up by academics talking about how the people that influence children or teenagers are other teenagers. You know, we as parents like to think that we're the biggest influence, but in fact, other teenagers affect them, their peer group affects them so much. So this book was I wanted it to be a celebration of teenagers, not the stereotype that we so often see in the media. So I wanted that, but I also was aware that the people who influence teenagers are other teens. So if a teenager is feeling maybe a bit down, not knowing which road to take, that maybe they could read this book and be influenced by one of the teens in it and take a path maybe that they hadn't thought of.
And your article in The Guardian was really inspiring to read in terms of being able to sort of demonstrate some of these teenagers that have become real role models. And I guess Wimbledon this year with Corey Goff was one of those things that just sort of took the world by storm. Not really, I think, for me anyway, the fact that she was just so young, but the way that she handled herself and her dedication and her focus and her understanding of what she was trying to achieve in her life generally, not just in that one tournament, was amazing. So what is it about this sort of revolution in terms of people's perceptions sometimes of what teenagers are able to achieve with the right focus?
Yeah, I think in a way this does seem to be the time of the teen. I mean, this generation of teenagers was brought up often being used to being listened to. This is not the sort of seen and not heard generation. These are people who've had their voices heard in their families. Maybe in some ways we can find it difficult to set the strong boundaries as we need to. They have the ability to influence others through their way they have complete mastery of social media in the way that certainly I don't. So there's a way that their ability to communicate and a bit of more of a sense that their voice is important. Maybe that's come together, and they are a generation that can make change. They don't need to wait until they're adults. Maybe they can see some of the difficulties there are in the world around them now and think, we weren't responsible for this. What can we do to help clean the oceans? What is it we can do? And the teenage mind from the teenagers I spoke to in the book just seems to work with that kind of clarity. Maybe they don't always overthink things. Maybe they're not quite as jaded as some adults who kind of think, oh, well, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Maybe they've just got that bit more energy and that capacity to have an idea and run with it.
I mean, I guess they really are, they're expanding into their adult life, aren't they? So it's really positive to hear that that's the case. And we do also hear sometimes about the biology of the brain and how that changes while they're growing through the teenage years. What do you think makes the difference in that? Do you think it is some teenagers, for whatever reason, have that passion and that understanding and wanting to make a difference and feeling like they can, as opposed to... one of the things you mentioned in the article was the fact that people's perceptions can be that teenagers are lazy and they don't want to get involved in anything, and they sort of push against boundaries like you talked about before. So it's often quite black and white in people's thinking, isn't it? And you very rarely sort of hear that sort of grey area between, well, this is their actions sometimes, and other times it's different, rather than just the teenagers that are go-getting and wanting to change the world, and different teenagers which are lazy and don't want to do anything. And it can't be as black and white as that, despite how the media might actually paint it.
I think one of the things that we wanted for this book, we didn't want to include, the astonishing teenage entrepreneurs who've made millions, or the sports stars who've done so astonishingly well and shown such power and mental strength, as you described at such a young age. We wanted to include their everyday heroes, so people that might have made a change that was needed to make in their own life, that has made them, as they see it, sort of better people in the world around them and influencing the world in that way, or people who've maybe gone through something terrible like losing a parent and have used that experience positively, maybe to fundraise or to make sure that death is talked about more freely than many of us adults know to do, or people who have seen something that they feel is not right in the world, like Amika George, who heard about period poverty and couldn't believe everyone wasn't talking about it. In fact, now the government has, after this hugely successful campaign that she's helped to run, now the government has agreed that sanitary protection will be in primary and secondary schools, which is a massive achievement for a teenager. That's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from everyday heroes, ordinary teenagers who've made that a difference that has impacted on those around them.
Were you able to identify what it was about those particular teens that enabled them to want to make a difference? You sort of mentioned that it may well be that they've been through something which is life-changing or traumatic, or just experienced something which made them get up and do something. But there must be lots of teens that actually wouldn't have done that. Is there sort of a common thread about the sorts of personality or the situation which made some people take action and others not?
Well, that's why I wrote the book. I wanted these incredibly impressive teenagers to inspire other teens, because those are the people teenagers listen to, other teenagers. So that was one of the reasons for the book. I think that the teenagers in the book often had an adult on their side in some way who was just giving them the right amount of support. So there was a girl in Zainab, a wonderful girl in a school in Lancashire, who was, as she described it, the class clown, messing about in class, every teacher's nightmare. And one of the staff said to her, "You have so much energy, why not use it for something positive?" And just that one intervention changed the whole direction of her life. So quite often is just a small intervention from a parent or a teacher or another adult in the life of a teen that can make that difference, even if we're not aware of it at the time. And also, it's as the British Dyslexia Association says about children with dyslexia who, despite struggling at school, manage to succeed in the outside world. It's finding your niche. So it's finding that thing that makes you, that sort of brings your heart alive and makes you think, I really want to do that. And there are so many examples of that in the book.
I think that's so true, isn't it? Because I think once you find your passion, once you find your niche, once you find your voice and what it is that you want to put your time and effort into, you suddenly realise how that affects you as a person. It goes back inward, doesn't it, rather than outward. And I think that ability then just makes you, or certainly for me it seems, you suddenly understand that the things that you're involved in your day-to-day life just become supportive. School is supportive in whichever way that happens to be. The tools that you're learning are supportive. And then it's not about just being part of a system. It's actually a part of the fact that, I can use all these things and the people around me to support what it is that I really want to do.
Absolutely. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I can give you some more examples of that if you like, but that's exactly it. So there was one girl who was coming up to her bat mitzvah, and she decided she didn't need presents. What she wanted was to raise money for a charity she really believed in to help girls in poor countries. And her whole school came behind her. Her I think it was her head teacher, and other girls in the school helped her raise significant amount of money. And she could just have carried on the normal way, having a do and getting presents from aunties and uncles. And in fact, she channeled it. There's a girl, Lucy Gaviner, who's quite well known, who, when she was very young, sort of met a hen, as she describes it, who was injured, and helped sort of notice her injuries and watched her get better. And it made her think about the welfare of chickens generally. And then she read up about it and found that many eggs in supermarkets came from caged hens, and she started a campaign, a letter writing campaign. She wrote masses of letters over many years that were ignored by supermarket chains. And then she started she used her knowledge of social media. She started a change.org petition and got hundreds of thousands of signatures. And at 14, she walked into Tesco head office and got them to change their policies. So yes, she found her niche. She used the skills she had, and amazing things happened.
And it's really important, that, isn't it? Is to remember that you are unique and you can only do it your way.
Yeah.
And that's that. I think that's exciting then, because it's very easy in this day and age of seeing celebrities or people around you doing seemingly extraordinary things and thinking you need to emulate them. And actually it's they're very good at being who they are, at whatever that is. And the important thing is it's important to be who you are, and that gives you all the skills you need then.
Yeah, one interview that particularly interested me was a boy from Australia who was very lucky. He was chosen to go on this big environmental camp in the USA. And so he went along with teenagers from lots of other countries, and they were exploring national parks, and it was all about helping the environment. And he came back home to Australia, and he thought, what this hasn't taught me isn't about the environment at all. It's taught me that I think our culture is actually very critical. It's critical of people who we feel don't fit in. It's critical of people we believe are nerdy. And it's changed his whole philosophy on acceptance. And I thought that was a really interesting and sophisticated response from such a young person. He went along to learn one thing, and in fact he learned something completely different but equally valid.
And I think that's the thing about just following your heart, isn't it? Taking you wherever it happens to go, whether it's a trip, whether it's getting involved in an organisation, whether it's having a passion project or a cause that you really want to do. You never know exactly where that's going to take you, who it's going to meet. And I really liked what you were saying before about the fact that we all have influence, and teenagers have guidance from all sorts of people. That you have your parents, you have your carers, you have your school teachers, you have your peers, whatever clubs and associations you might be in. Actually, someone within there will speak to you in a way, and I don't mean verbally, I mean in terms of actually understanding you, and that really connects in a way. And so we all have a part to play, and you're never quite sure how you might fit into that, but it's a key thing.
I remember from when I was a teenager that sometimes, very occasionally, a teacher would say something and I wouldn't acknowledge the impact they'd had, but they had had a transformative impact on how I felt about myself. Sometimes it's just one line, and I think it's important that teachers know that.
Absolutely. I think exactly how you talk all the time is important, rather than it's often not necessarily that sit down pearl of wisdom. We need to change the world now because we need a proper conversation. It's the everyday here and now, and that relationship.
And that teachers can actually be everyday heroes too, really, you know, and maybe without realizing it. Maybe they'll go home exhausted after a day dealing with a class of teenagers, and actually they've really changed someone's life almost without knowing it.
And you said the peer-to-peer thing is really, really important, and I guess this is where this book has the most power, is the fact that teenagers and young people will be able to relate to the people that have actually spoken to you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why the book was written. Some of the research I did as I was sort of formulating the introduction was I went to speak to the Royal Society of the Arts, and they did this fantastic research last year called Teen Agency. And they found in that adults' attitudes to teenagers really leaves a lot to be desired. So adults were given a list of adjectives to choose from. And the ones they believed most applied to teenagers were selfish, lazy, and antisocial. And if you think about that really is very shocking. If that's how we're stereotyping teenagers, they'll know if we're disrespecting them. And how are they expected to respect themselves if that's the attitude they're getting from the adults around them? You know, we really need to up our game. And they found that when teenagers said they wanted to volunteer, they were interested in volunteering, the adults said it was because the main reason adults said they wanted to do that was because it would be good for their CVs and good for their UCAS statements. And when the teenagers were asked, why do you want to volunteer? They said, it's because we want to help others. So how have we got it so wrong? I've told people as I'm walking down the street, oh, how old are your kids now? And when I said they were teenagers, you get this look of pity. What's that about? You know, teenagers can be amazing. Clearly, a lot of what we see on TV or on social media or read in the newspapers is negative. But, you know, we have to know that there is more to life than that. You know, we need not to forget. You know, I've forgotten with my daughter. I remember having the usual mother-daughter teenage struggles with her. And she came home one day from school and said, oh, these two boys were being horrible to this other boy. So I stepped in and I really let them have it. And I thought, oh my goodness, I forgot that about you. You know, I forgot that you have such this sense of right and wrong and justice. I was still thinking about, you know, that we hadn't got Drake tickets or, you know, whatever it was, you know. So yeah, that you'd come in so late last night, whatever the latest, issue was. So it's so important that we see what's there, that we don't forget to see what's amazing.
And what advice would you give for sort of both sides of that coin? I was just thinking there, a lot of it is that communication, isn't it? It's been able to listen enough to hear what's going on so they feel that they're heard. And at the same time, understanding that the teenage years are difficult and actually you're going to have those power struggles and the fact that they are trying to find their way in life, but at the same time that isn't essentially who they are. It is part of the growing up process, and that's difficult for adults as well.
All of that. I mean, it's their job to disagree with us, because they're becoming the adults they're becoming. Um, and I suppose it's our job to remember that their time will come. Um, yeah. So as you said before, science shows us that teenagers are impressionable. They're going through a lot of changes. And we need to be constant. We need to be the voice of support, and we need to have faith in them.
I think that's I think that's great. Yeah, exactly. Just that understanding that they have the tools that they need, and actually all we're doing is hopefully giving them the environment to flourish, and all those positive things come out, which I think the more they hear those things, and obviously as they read the book, then they'll start to identify all of those things within them, especially if they're feeling slightly unsure about where their path is, or how they're supposed to be in the world, which is obviously a big thing when you're a teenager, to actually
Absolutely.
hear lots of these different stories, and you often have that common thread going through, which just gives them an inkling that actually, yes, it is okay, and it will actually work out as it's supposed to.
Yeah, absolutely. That in a nutshell.
So, for people that would love to find out more about it and actually read the book, where's the best place for them to go and get it?
Well, in the UK, they can get it at Waterstones. They can get it in their local bookshop. They can get it online at the usual places. I really hope they enjoy it. I'm on Twitter on @Margs Rooke, and also less often on Instagram, also on @Margs Rooke.
The people that you spoke to, are they actually from around the world, or are they UK based? You talked about someone from Australia as well. Is it sort of representative of around the world?
Yes, there are a lot of people in the book from the USA, including an amazing forward writer. There's people from many different countries, from Malawi to Armenia to Canada, a lot from Scandinavia by chance. There's a wonderful girl called Guro who she was watching a pop video, and she was really shocked that the girls in it were being used for decoration rather than as part of the action of the video. And she complained to the company that made the pop video, and they ignored her, and she set up a campaign, and in the end they changed the video, they remade it. So I think a lot of teenage girls are, could learn from that, really, that we teenage girls need to be portrayed with an equality with teenage boys.
And I think the thing that really speaks to me the most out of our conversation is just the fact that how big a difference you could make. Like you say, that the walking into head office of Tesco's, for example, is no mean feat when you're a teenager, or anybody thinking, oh, but I know I don't like the fact that this is the reality, but nothing's ever going to change. To hear those stories about the fact that it can make massive difference if you're really consistent about it and put the time and realise that it's a journey. I mean, I think that's an incredible thing to come away with.
Well, on the other hand, there's a boy in the book who had no friends at primary school, who was bullied, who went to secondary school. On his first day, he made the decision, I am going to make a friend today. He completely rewrote his life, and he successfully made a lovely friend. They're still best friends today. And, extraordinary strength of character that a child stroke teen like that has shown. And that's incredibly inspiring, I think.
I think as soon as you really feel that you can control your life, I mean, that's a very black and white decision, isn't it? Having had an experience before and then to decide to do that, and I think there's a lot of power in there and a lot of impact. And having written the book and spoken to all these people, what would your sort of final conclusion or sum up be about it in terms of what you expected would be the outcome, or any surprises that came from it?
I suppose what really hit home to me is that what I want teenagers to know is that you are the generation with the power to make change. You don't have to wait. You can begin to make the changes you want to see now. I think it's interesting how many teenagers talk about David Attenborough, who obviously is at completely the other end of the age scale, but there's something about the simplicity with which he shows what he thinks is wrong with the world that appeals to them. And I think he's a great role model for teenagers. You know, he's saying there's plastic in the ocean, what are we going to do about it? And teenagers can respond to that. You know, this is this is their world. This is the world they're inheriting. And they can really do something practical to make it better.
And finally, what advice would you give your younger self now, based partly on your experience of having gone through all these interviews, but also in terms of what you've learned through your journey going from a teenager into adulthood?
I've come across a lot of very distraught children and teens in the talks I've given about my dyslexia books. And what I wish for them and any other teenager struggling is that when they have those feelings, when they have those feelings, I don't know, they've spent some time and they've come to terms with those feelings, that there is a whole world out there for them. They can reach to achieve what they really want to see for themselves and their communities and for the wider world. And so, so that's something that I would wish for them.
I think it's such a powerful message. I think it's such an important book, and thank you so much for creating it and writing it and sharing your story with it. And I encourage everybody to go out and read it. I'm certainly going to go and buy a copy so that it's living on the bookshelf, well, actually living in the house for our teenagers to read as well, because I think it's such an important thing. And thank you for sharing your time and spreading such an important message.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Learning on Fire podcast. For more information, please visit educationonfire.com and follow the links from the homepage. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.